All right. Good afternoon. My name is Al Wood. I am a doctoral candidate at Michigan State University.
Hi, I'm Kyle Greenwalt. I'm an associate professor of teacher education at Michigan State. I'm also our associate director of teacher preparation and was also a high school social studies teacher. Al, I think you were as well, right?
Yeah, I was a high school social studies teacher for 9 years before coming back to MSU. And we're going to chat a little bit about the research in a paper we just published in Theory and Research in Social Education titled Embracing the Interdisciplinary Nature of Psychology, Challenging the Increasing Dismissiveness of High School Psychology as a Social Studies Course.
Quite a mouthful.
Yes. So for me, what brought me to the study of psychology and what made me interested in diving into this a little bit more was the passion of high school students when they get to take an elective social studies class. And psychology is kind of a perfect example of an elective social studies class where children or students are electing to come take the class and dive into stuff that they are interested in. And I wanted to learn more about, how can we as a social studies field provide more of those experiences, and what do good elective social studies experiences look like? And as we started to dive a little bit into psychology, we started to realize that the mere notion of psychology being a social studies class is even a question mark. And psychology, to the American Psychological Association, they want it to be classified as a science class. So that led me to think, okay, so how are teachers who are teaching psychology every day, how do they perceive the class? Do they perceive it as a science class? Do they perceive it as a social studies class? And how does that relate to um, what good teaching of psychology looks like in classrooms?
Yeah, I mean, this paper, I do think it raises a lot of just the way we've approached it, raises a lot of interesting questions about the field of teaching in general. And as you know, like one is like an elective. So when we get as teachers, really it's in any subject, when you get to teach an elective and there are no state standards associated with that course that tell you how you have to teach it, what do you do? Are we as teachers really good at taking advantage of that freedom? Or are we out there, looking for someone to tell us what and how to teach? And I think, probably good teachers find a way to kind of find a balance, right, between like what's kind of the accepted content that we're expected to teach, but also what interests us and what interests our students. And so that's certainly at play in this paper and in the teaching of psychology. I think another thing that's really interesting is the status and the role of AP courses in the high school curriculum. And is AP kind of the tail that wags the dog, or is it the dog itself? Or is it the tail? Like we're trying to figure that out, I think, in a lot of different subjects, but I think we've kind of seen, I'm previewing a little bit here, you know, the AP framework is also important. And whether or not you're teaching AP psychology, it does tend to have an influence in the way a lot of teachers think. And so it kind of raises the question of like, is AP actually good for the American curriculum, or is it in some ways limiting what we can do in classrooms? Um, and then a third thing I'll just say briefly, I think this also just grows out of a question about how do we prepare the next generation of psychology teachers. And so as we kind of went through, new state rules for the preparation of teachers here in Michigan and the redesign of our program, um, really we needed to start to provide more methods coursework that would help people specifically to teach high school psychology. And there's not a lot of research out there on that. So we really needed to go hear from teachers to really understand what are they doing in high school psychology classrooms so that we could start to use that to prepare the next generation. And so that really leads into our study, right, Al?
Right. So for us, one of the big motivations was how do we as a teacher education program at Michigan State prepare psychology teachers who are able to hit the ground running when they go into a classroom, who know where to go and find resources and where to find supports. So one of the first things we wanted to do is kind of put out a survey of psychology teachers across the state of Michigan, asking what do you do in the classroom? What kind of, where do you find your curriculum? Because in Michigan, there are no psychology standards, and psychology is an endorsement that can be latched onto any different primary certification area, English, social studies, science, etc. So, where did you get the knowledge that you have for teaching psychology specifically? Um, where do you go for professional development, for support from other psychology teachers? What kind of psychology classes do you teach? And then once we gave that survey, kind of just getting a broad spectrum look of where psychology teachers are at, what they're doing across the state. Then we took 6 teachers from that survey. We asked them if they wanted to be interviewed with more depth so that we could really kind of unpack their curricular thinking, like how do they choose what to teach across the entire year, and then how do they choose on a lesson by lesson basis, like what makes a good psychology lesson. Do you think of psychology as a science or a social studies course, that sort of thing? So we ended up with 6 psychology teachers who we interviewed at length. Most of the interviews were an hour to an hour and a half long. They ranged from teachers in urban schools, rural schools, suburban schools, all across the state of Michigan. Um, and then we took those interviews and we just wanted to see, okay, what are some patterns that we're noticing in terms of what good psychology teachers are doing, how psychology teachers are deciding what to teach in a state where there's no standards. What is their relationship with the AP curriculum in circumstances where they're teaching AP, for example, and so on. So, Kyle, what do you think from our study was the most valuable thing that we came out with for practicing psychology teachers?
Yep. I hope people will read the paper too. I mean, certainly, I think we try to write it in a way that's accessible for
Hmm.
practitioners as well as for researchers. But for me, I will just say I think just really important that we're finding a space in the curriculum for kids to talk about and to think about, um, for lack of a better word, wellness issues. Like we know that there are epidemics out there of anxiety, depression, various mental health concerns among kids, among teenagers. I think this generation of students is much better at talking and being open about these things. I think that's really great. And we also know, I think, through a lot of psychology studies, but also other types of studies, but particularly pointing out like things like positive psychology, like just, again, limiting our social media use, spending time with friends, spending time in nature, importance of sleep, a healthy diet. Um, so I'm really interested in that value of that course to connect with what kind of questions kids have. I think, and I'm guessing those are some of the types of concerns that they're bringing, and there certainly is some prior research to suggest this when they come to that course. So they're looking for really a space to reflect and to think about their own lives, and I think that that's important. That space doesn't really exist in the curriculum that we have right now in high schools, so maybe there was a little bit more space in the past for that type of thing. So I think there's just an immense potential of psychology to really interest kids, really speak to their needs, to really address some pressing social problems. There's the mental health side of it, but there's also questions, bigger societal questions around prejudice and power and coercion. And these are big social issues too, obviously, that we need to be thinking about. So I think there's such a possibility there, a curricular possibility, and I'm really interested to the degree to which teachers were able to dig into that. And I think all of them really acknowledged that this is important stuff and that kids do find this interesting, that they do want to talk about it, though always carefully and with some caveats. But what we really saw was, this push to treat psychology as a science, this pressure, in some ways to do science, which was often, related more to learning like physiology or structures of the brain. Um, this really limited teachers' ability to connect to the content that they thought kids wanted to talk about. So this vision of a social studies, which is interdisciplinary and focused on civic competence and tied to the lived experiences and the community assets of children. Um, I still think social studies is the best home for psychology because it gives us this space in the curriculum for kids to talk about things that's really important to them. And the push to teach it as a science, I think, has had a bad effect there. How about you? What are some of your takeaways and things that really excite you from this study?
Well, what's interesting about what you said is that some of these things that I think sometimes we found that teachers were scared, or not necessarily scared, but just didn't feel like they had the time to talk about in the curriculum that have to do with wellness, that have to do with positive psychology. Some of the teachers in our study felt as if the science push made them feel like they had to accomplish too many other things, that they didn't have the time to get to the positive psychology and the wellness principles. And it's interesting that with the AP psychology redesign that's coming out for the fall of 2024, the College Board actually added positive psychology as a specific principle there. So I think there's agreement that students who take psychology, and remember, students who take psychology 99% of the time are choosing to take it on an elective basis. They want a class where they can talk about their own lives, their own experiences. They want to get to know the brain. Yes, of course, but they want to get to know the brain so that they can understand themselves and so that they can understand how to take better care of themselves and how to relate with other people and how their own brains are operating. So I think, and I think we know this no matter what the field, what the subject area is, the more relevant we make our content, the more capturing it's going to be for students. And I think we found that the push to teach psychology as a science, primarily coming from the American Psychological Association and College Board, that push is making a lot of teachers feel as if they can't take a lot of time and talk about things that kids really feel more captured by. And I think that another thing we found from the study was that psychology teachers, one teacher in our study kept referring to herself as an island. She felt like she was the only psychology teacher in her high school, and she wanted to know, where do I go to get support, just hear what other teachers are doing, because there's no one else that does what I do in the school. And we if I think this study helps us to see that we need to create more communities of psychology teachers, maybe for the administrators listening, to give them the opportunity to come together once a semester just to have a professional learning conversation about the things that they're doing in their classes. Um, for me, I think the only other thing that I would mention, Kyle, that you haven't already necessarily, is just know. I think as psychology teachers, we need to know what our kids want to get out of the class. And I think our kids come to the class, or come to any class, with a lot of different expectations. Some students are taking psychology to prepare for a college level psychology class, especially students who are enrolling in AP, and they want that college level experience. Other students are coming to the class simply wanting to learn more about the human brain without necessarily the push of a college psychology course. And then you have other students who are kind of, thrown in there by their guidance counselors. And you have other students who are coming in there with a variety of different interests and intersections of different interests. Maybe they both want the college prep experience and they want to learn more about themselves at the same time. So I guess I just want, the teachers listening to this to feel empowered to teach psychology the way that your students want you to teach it, and to feel empowered to do the things that your kids need from the course, and then make the connections back to the science as appropriate. And if you have students in the class that do not necessarily want the college level experience, I think it's perfectly acceptable to teach psychology without making it a college level course. So Kyle, I know from the teacher preparation program perspective at Michigan State were able to take this study and do some, carry this out a little bit more into our program here at Michigan State. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about kind of what this meant for you as a teacher educator, preparing psychology to the next generation of psychology teachers?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, and I think this is actually something we've heard from some of the teachers we've worked with, because to your point about the need for professional development, one thing that came out of this study was a conference. So we had a practitioner conference for teachers in Michigan. Do we have anybody from out of state? I can't remember.
No, I
Indiana,
think it was all
or
Michigan,
Ohio.
or all
Okay,
across the state.
all across the state. And it was, I think every people really jumped at this opportunity to come to campus and to spend a day listening to some keynote speakers. But you know what? And more than anything, just to be around other psychology teachers, to have lunch with them, to have coffee with them, it was a pretty big deal. And to your point, Al, they just don't get that. They're on those islands in many cases. They're the only perhaps psychology teacher in their school. And some people are teaching it all day, like every prep. And so, imagine being that person teaching that course and really not having anyone to bounce ideas off of. I do think the community, has built up a good Facebook group that allows them to communicate, but there really is probably that face-to-face and just ability to be with other teachers who are, understand some of the pressures and dilemmas that you're facing. I think that's invaluable. So that was a good thing. I think a lot of those teachers there had been teaching for a long time as well. And they were concerned about the next generation of psychology teachers. So, for practicing psychology teachers who are listening to this, I hope you really do give some thought to that, to the next generation. I know at MSU, we've just designed a new 3 credit course that we're going to ask people who want in Michigan, if you want to teach high school psychology in a special teaching endorsement. It doesn't come packaged within social studies or science. You have to get this 30 credit or so psychology endorsement and have to have a bit of student teaching in it as well. So that can usually be added on to another subject. But we want to make sure people are prepared. And I think, taking 4 or 5 psychology courses does not prepare you to be a teacher in high school psychology. I think we'd all agree with that. So, providing some method specific training, and we really want that to be from a practicing teacher. So, I think, we'll probably rotate in guest professors who are teaching in the area. Maybe make that a virtual course so we can really capture people from a lot of different backgrounds. And I think, I think at Michigan State, we really pride ourselves on giving the voice of our mentor teachers and teachers in the state a prominent place in our program. That we're working together. We're trying to create that next generation of teachers, and we can't do it without practicing teachers. So that's definitely the case in psychology as well. And so, whenever you have a project like this, and you see something, not only a manuscript, which is a really lovely thing that's being published in Theory and Research and Social Education, but a practitioner conference, a new course in the university curriculum. These are pretty exciting and lasting things. So I think all in all, Al, it was a really fun project. I enjoyed working with you on it, and you were fantastic.
Yeah, and I enjoyed working with you too, Kyle, and appreciate the opportunity and enjoyed working with the psychology teachers and learning from teachers about what works and what doesn't. Because I think at the end of the day, you know, folks in academia or, the National Council for Social Studies or American Psychological Association College Board, we can sit up and talk all day about what works in psychology classrooms with theoretical perspective, but at the end of the day, what matters most is what actually works in a classroom. And I really loved having the opportunity to learn from teachers, um, and being able to make recommendations based on what actual teachers who are teaching real psychology classes are saying. Awesome. So the name of the paper again is Embracing Interdisciplinary Nature of Psychology, Challenging the Increasing Dismissiveness of High School Psychology as a Social Studies Course. It is published in Theory and Research in Social Education, and we hope you'll take the opportunity to check it out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.